And welcome to our coverage of the 82nd Tour de France. I'm Phil Liggett. I'm looking forward to being with you now for the next 3 weeks and joined as ever by Gary Imlach and Paul Sherwin. Well, last year Chris Boardman really did thrill us with his victory in the Prologue time trial, and he's going to attempt to do the same thing today. And naturally enough, here in Saint-Brieuc, our programme will concentrate on his efforts. And just 5 minutes ago, Chris Boardman made his start from the start house for the opening prologue of the Tour de France. His face concentration, carrying all British hopes of an early yellow jersey. And that was a few minutes ago, and as you could see, since we opened the programme, the weather has changed dramatically. These pictures are now live from out on the course, and indeed news is reaching us, and it is unconfirmed, I hasten to add, that Chris Boardman has crashed out on the Prologue time trial. Now, our cameras will reveal all in a few minutes, but as you can see, the weather has turned dramatically, and it's turned this Prologue time trial into a skid pan. The early starter, Jackie Duron, the 27th man to leave in lovely warm conditions, is the leader on the board with a time of exactly 9 minutes. And we're now watching here on the climb, coming over the top, Oscar Pelliccioli, a former king of the mountains in the Tour of Italy 1 year ago. Paul, any news on Boardman?
The news coming over at the moment is he's alongside his team manager's car and he's holding his leg, and it seems to me this is news that's coming over the race radio at the moment, so it may well be Boardman starting extremely quickly. The first indications where he had a superb time over the first part of the course. He was descending at 70-75 kilometers an hour. He may have taken a few too many risks, but we'd have to wait for the cameras to get out there, out onto the course to get real confirmation, but that seems to be the story coming through at the moment.
Well, this is the man who got an 11th hour call-up, and his team indeed to the Tour de France at the expense of Robert Miller's Le Groupement team, which pulled out of the sport altogether just a couple of days ago. Zenon Jaskula now making his start. 2 years ago, he finished third in the Tour de France, the highest finish ever by a Polish rider. There's the overall situation. Jackie Duron in with 9 minutes exactly. Pelliccioli comes in 163rd, losing 73 seconds indeed to the time there of Jackie Duron. Well, this is a very sad state of affairs indeed. The organisation here has worked so hard to make this a success, and the result is the rain has come and ruined the spectacle completely here in Brittany. And the riders now are waiting still to start. Tony Rominger is the man who will claim that bicycle in the start house, and still to go after him will be Marco Pantani, Yevgeny Berzin, and of course Miguel Indurain. Now, Tony Rominger, will he like the conditions?
He will not like the conditions. Nobody has liked these conditions today. It has been so dangerous. It's been extremely tricky out there. A lot of the top champions will not take the risk because they could lose the Tour de France with a crash like this out on the course. Rominger has got about 1 minute to go before he starts. He may well have already heard the information about Chris Boardman out on the course there, and it's not even come back to us here in the commentary position as to whether or not Chris Boardman is up and running again at the moment. This is Tony Rominger, the man who so much wants to win this year's Tour de France, but there has been a catastrophe out there on the course for Chris Boardman at the moment, and it really is a shame. He's given everything. He's dedicated himself to this prologue. He won the prologue of the Tour de France last year with a record time. He must have taken so many risks out on the corners there that he just couldn't hold it up in one of them.
Well, we've always talked about how great a favourite Miguel Indurain is, and this is the very thing that can happen to a long-distance cyclist. The weather changes like it has and turns the race into a little bit of a farce. Now, Paul, this takes me back to 1978 when the Tour started in Holland in Leiden, where the stage from memory was won by Jan Raas. The next day they annulled the stage and started again. They didn't count the prologue.
Well, it was a very tricky time trial course as well, I have to admit. There were a lot of cobblestones in, as there are in this time trial here around Saint-Brieuc. Normally on a tarmac road like this, it isn't quite so bad. But once you get rain on the cobblestones, and these little tiny cobblestones that you've got around here in this Breton town really are slippy and treacherous in this damp, wet conditions. This is Tony Rominger out on the course, and you can see as he goes round this corner how carefully the riders are taking it when they come onto these little pieces of cobbles, and that may well be what the organisation of the Tour de France will be obliged to do today, because there has been so much of a difference between the early starters in this time trial and the riders who are starting now.
Well, Jackie Duron, who will have to be brought back from his hotel where he's been for an hour or so now, and will be very surprised if he's watching television that he's still the leader on the board. But to my knowledge, Jackie Duron has never in his life as a professional won a time trial race. And the former champion of France, in fact, he's won the road race championship the last 2 years, which he lost that title just a few days ago, which passed over to Eddy Seigneur, a teammate of Chris Boardman. This is Rominger out on the course now. a man much more likely to produce a good time in bad weather. He is a tough rider, but my goodness me, he never expected conditions like this. The arrival now of Maurizio Fondriest of the Lamprey team.
Which confirms, in fact, that Chris Boardman isn't around, because he started behind Chris Boardman out on the course. So Boardman still may be standing at the side of the road. I know the race doctor will be out there as quickly as possible, but we're waiting now for Chris Boardman to come. Maurizio Fondriest started 2 minutes behind him, so Boardman losing an awful lot of time. It may well be that he hasn't got up and started the Tour de France at the moment. We just can't get in these conditions any information from out on the race route.
Well, look at this, Fondriest, who won the time trial stage of the Kellogg's Tour of Britain last year, way down the overall situation. Look how delicately too. This is a really downhill, hairpin right bend. It continues to turn after this bend. As we swing back here with our French television to see the start of Marco Pantani, who nearly lost both wheels on that blue square of paint. Every rider has slipped as they've left the start house. Pantani nearly gave us a double there.
Well, absolutely treacherous, that paint on the front there, the Saint-Brieuc sign. It looked absolutely marvellous here before we started the race, because there was a superb day. The last 2 or 3 days have been very, very hot, and that has made it even more treacherous. This is the first rain that the area has had in so many months, and it really is an awful shame for the organisation. But Rominger, you see, taking a great deal of care going around these corners.
And there, as he comes out of the bend and goes through the chicane, well, of course, this is very definitely a stage of the Tour de France, and Chris Boardman has to finish it to be allowed to start tomorrow's stage at all, and at the moment he has not come in. So we are waiting to hear more on that, but these are live pictures coming to you from the Tour de France, and we'll have to go with what comes at us. And right now we're looking at the arrival of Alex Zülle, who Paul and I were feeling this was a man who could spring a surprise, but of course the weather has done that already. Zülle, who finished second in his home tour, the Tour of Switzerland, and now heading up in the murk of the evening here in Brittany. And Zülle has not enjoyed his ride a bit, but his time is going to tell us just how well he will stay up among the leaders. Remember, Jackie Giron, and there's his time. This is an extremely fine performance by Zülle. He's going to finish in one of the best times since the rain come down, but that is only good enough for 26th place at the moment, 9 minutes, 23 seconds. And this is Evgeny Berzin, the rider who is riding his first Tour de France, having last year won so convincingly the Tour of Italy, where he beat Miguel Indurain, and now he's facing him here in the Tour de France.
And all these riders realise now how dangerous it is out on the course. Boardman still hasn't come up to the finish line here. He only has to finish the stage today, because in the Prologue time trial you cannot be eliminated. He just has to be able to try and get up. But we're getting confirmation now, in fact, that Boardman hasn't restarted, and in fact he will not cross the finish line here, so he has abandoned the Tour de France.
Well, this is unbelievable, but our computer here, the Finnish commentary position, simply says big surprise with Chris Boardman, who will not cross the finishing line, and they will give us more details soon. But it sounds as though Boardman has withdrawn from the Tour de France after a matter of 2 miles or 3 or 4 kilometres, and that is all. Down onto the quayside now as we cross the valleys to climb back up to the finish, and this is Tony Rominger in full cry. This is probably the fastest section of the course after you come off the descent. It is flat, the only flat bit on it officially is 25 metres above sea level, and then they climb up the hill towards the finish, which will bring them up to around 300 metres above sea level. Well, Rominger, of course, will not be concerned about the great time by Jackie Giron. He will be more concerned about the time that Miguel Indurain will do, or indeed this man, last year's King of the Mountains, Richard Virenque. And Virenque is finding his form. He's had a very good race just before coming to the Tour de France. He is now on form. He's looking very, very strong on the climb here.
He's posted some fantastic performances. You know, he beat Miguel Indurain on 2 of the mountain stages of the recent Dauphiné Libéré in France, and he really has announced himself as a great challenger this year. He says, I will go out and I will fight Indurain on all of his own terrains, but this year I feel as if I've improved enough in the time trial to actually be a challenger for the overall standings.
Well, he's the pin-up boy of France, Richard Virenque. All the ladies seem to like him, and he always turns on the style when he comes to the Tour. He's only a young man, but he loves this race, and he's now going to try and put in a time that will survive near the men that matter. And there in the start house, in the corner of our picture, is Miguel Indurain wearing the yellow jersey as last year's winner of the Tour, as Richard Virenque comes home. And his time, not a great one. He's gone over the 10-minute mark. That'll put him in the hundreds. And I think a quick flash, 139th finish for Richard Virenque. So Virenque is in with a poorish time, but remember, he's only worried about the tides of Indurain, Rominger and the late starters. Giron will pass away. Even if he gets the lead tonight, he'll pass away later in this Tour for sure. Now, the big man is on course.
He's on course, and take note, Phil, because in fact he's adopted a normal bicycle. One or two riders out in the early part of the rain were trying to use the aerodynamic bicycles. It may well be that they weren't able to get them here from the hotels in time to change. Indurain, starting the last man of the day, as using a normal road bike with no advantage at all from the aerodynamics. He wants safety. He doesn't want to take any risks at all, but he's riding extremely well at the moment. And a strange thing is he hasn't even worn a helmet, because normally Indurain always puts a helmet on in the time trial.
That's a good point. In fact, a lot of riders have started today without their streamline helmets on. They're just riding normal bikes as well. Now, Chris Boardman, in fact, started with his helmet on, a streamlined helmet, and indeed his very, very streamlined Lotus machine. It may not have been the bike for this course, which has turned out to be technically extremely difficult, and the weather has made it quite simply treacherous. Now, Miguel Indurain, he has won throughout his career 8 time trials in the Tour de France. In the last 4 victories, he's gone on to win in Paris. He is the king of time trials. Only Chris Boardman really has upset the rhythm in the Tour. Now he seems to be out at the moment. This is the arrival now of Zenon Jaskula, a very good time trialist indeed, when he can turn on the style. He's a tough man. They make them tough in Poland, and Zenon Jaskula is doing a very good ride here. He'll be much quicker than Richard Virenque as he comes over the line in 9 minutes and 44 seconds. That will keep him well in touch with the leaderboard, but not indeed in touch with the man who leads this race right now, Jackie Giron. And Jackie Giron, in fact, now has been brought back to the area here, ready for the presentation in case nobody does beat him. And that's from a man who started 27th of the 189 riders today. That reminds a little bit about Sean Yates' great victory a few years back. Because the weather changed, he had a tailwind, the rest got a crosswind.
That's right, Rominger's the next man to come. There are only 4 more riders who can actually dethrone Jackie Giron at the moment. That's either going to be Tony Rominger, Marco Pantani, Eugenie Berzin or Miguel Indurain himself. But you can see, in fact, Tony Rominger has taken the risk. He's got his full helmet on. He's also using his aerodynamic time trial bicycle, and that may well give him a slight advantage over Miguel Indurain. But it's interesting to note, I wonder what the organisation of the Tour de France are going to do this evening, whether they're going to let the results stand or if they'll come back on it like they did in Leiden in Holland at 1978 and actually just stop the result.
Well, knowing Chris Boardman's team manager, Roger Leger, who has ridden the Tour de France, he'll be into the jury room tonight, and the meetings could go on quite late, I think, as they try to persuade them to either annul this event or allow Chris Boardman back in. But if you don't finish the stage, I'm not too sure quite how they will get round those rules. Anyway, the arrival of Rominger now, the man who is second favourite in this year's Tour de France to Indurain. And now we'll get some real idea as to the quality of this man's performance. He goes over the cobblestones, and on screen now, it's a good ride. It's going to be alongside Zenon Jaskula's as Tony Rominger comes home. But again, 26 seconds lost to Giron. 30th place for Tony Rominger, 9:26 his time. So he is 18 seconds better than Zenon Jaskula, as immediately we switch out now back to the quayside, which is about halfway along this 7-kilometre course, and Indurain quickly out of the saddle, because this is one of the areas where he can limit his losses or indeed make time.
He won't take any risks at all in the corners, and this is where he'll try and put his power to good use. You know, when he comes to the final climb up here, that is when Indurain may well be able to pull something back, but it doesn't look at the moment as if anybody is going to dethrone Jackie Giron. As we said, he started in 27th position on the day, and he really had the advantage of having a totally dry course. But Indurain is not going to go down without a fight. He's riding like a man possessed at the moment. He's totally concentrating. You can see he's looking all over the road, trying to cut every last little bit that he can. But at the end of this long straight, he will turn to the left and then have to start the long climb back up to the finish line. It takes 3 kilometers for him to reach that, and Indurain looking extremely strong at the moment, as did Tony Rominger a little bit earlier. But you see those times are all still off the leaderboard of 9 minutes, which was set so early in the day by Jackie Giron, the former double French champion.
So Indurain continues to ride in front of a vastly thinned crowd here, which has been standing behind those barriers 10 deep all day. And as soon as the action started, the rain came and many of them have slipped away. Well, again, on the finishing line here now, where Boardman has not arrived, the journalists are saying that he has been taken to hospital, but there is no confirmation of any of his injuries at all. But they are saying that Chris has been taken to hospital.
That is such a shame, Phil, because he built himself up for this event. He abandoned the midi-lead. This is Marco Pantani, the young man who was the revelation of last year's Tour de France, a superb climber. He won't be liking the conditions out there at the moment, but I feel he's come back to form. He had an awful accident early in May when he was knocked off out training by a motorist, and then he came back in the Tour of Switzerland and he absolutely leapt up the mountains, the same as he was doing in the Tour de France last year, and won a stage just before the end, and that's when he decided he was good enough to come back and ride the Tour de France this year.
Well, this is a real true climber, one we haven't seen the like of for many, many years in the Tour de France. He will excite us when we go into the Alps and the Pyrenees for sure. And his time in the time trial is not bad either. 9 minutes, 50 seconds, only 104 for Marco Pantani. But he survived the day and hasn't conceded much time at all to Rominger, Gascula or Alex Zülle. Zülle, by the way, has done 9 minutes 23 seconds, so he's picked up 3 seconds on Tony Rominger. And that is an indication of the way this race might have gone if Jackie Giron had not had the opportunity to start in the much better conditions. Indurain looks very, very cool indeed here. This man is vastly experienced. He knows what he has to do. He won't worry about winning this race or beating Giron. He will just want to know what the times are of Rominger, Pantani, Berzin. They're the men he's concerned with. And he may well have known before the start that Boardman had crashed as well.
He may well have done. He was down there on the start line, and the news gets round very quickly here. It may well be a little bit of jungle telegraph, but Miguel Indurain will know. You can look at his face now, though. He's not thinking about Boardman. He's not thinking about Rominger. He's totally convinced that he has to get to the top of this climb as fast as possible. He looks extremely strong. He hasn't weakened at all. He's got about 2 kilometers to go, I think, before he gets to the finish line. And Miguel Indurain looks to me like he's set for a fine performance, but we've got to wait for the clock. It gets out of the saddle here to lift that pace a bit. It really is a hard part of the course. It's a tough finish. 3 kilometers from the bottom of the valley there up to the finish line here in Saint-Brieuc.
Well, this is the man who lost his hat-trick of wins in the Prologue time trial last year when Chris Boardman beat him by 15 seconds and set the fastest time ever seen, or the fastest average speed ever seen in any stage of the Tour de France at 55 kilometers an hour. Now Boardman appears to be out of this year's Tour. Berzin now coming up towards the finish. That leaves just Indurain out on the course. Evgeny Berzin, will this be the man to challenge Miguel Indurain right through the 3 weeks of this year's Tour de France? Well, we're going to get some idea now, Paul, as he rolls up towards the finish, soaking wet.
He doesn't look so good. He looked to me as if he was slipping a little bit in those corners, and today is a day that the mechanics have to play their role as well to make sure that all the tyre pressures are exact, because if the tyres are too hard, that's when the bicycle will slip all over the road here as he comes up to the line. He's well off the leaderboard. He's over 10 minutes.
Well, this is a disastrous time for little Evgeny Berzin. 10:07, only 156 of the 188 riders who have now finished their stage of the Tour de France. The other man is this man here, who has won the last 4 Tours de France. Out of the last 3 prologues, he's won 2 of them, finished second in the other. And I feel he's not going to win this one now, but he's done a very strong ride indeed. He's way up on Evgeny Berzin, and you know, Indurain could take a minute here out of Berzin, and what a way to start the Tour proper tomorrow, a minute to the good over somebody like Berzin.
And also he may well get a 30-second advantage only Tony Rominger. Rominger finished in 9 minutes and 26 seconds, and Miguel Indurain has not weakened at all on this climb. He's really still going along as strong as ever, but he's lost so much time on those corners. You know, everybody has lost time. There's the team manager right up behind him there giving him that information, but that is the face of a Miguel Indurain who's extremely concentrated. We have to wait now for the time split, the time to come up on the screen in front of us, and this is Miguel Indurain, and what is going to be the time?
So now we have Miguel Indurain turning into the home straight here in Saint-Brieuc in the most atrocious conditions I can remember for a prologue since 1978. Miguel Indurain is now sprinting for the line, and this is the man who's going to show us what times are, but it's way outside of Jackie Giron, who will win the prologue time trial. Indurain himself, 9:31, and finishes only 35th. With that time of 9 minutes and 31 seconds, he concedes time to Alex Zülle, Tony Rominger, 2 principal men who will attack him as this race goes on. But you know, in fact, Miguel Indurain has done a great ride under the conditions, but the man that we are all concerned about is Chris Boardman. We are receiving unconfirmed reports that in fact he has gone to hospital. There does seem no doubt, however, that his Tour de France has lasted something like 5 minutes. When we come back after the break, we'll do our best to update you on the situation.
To emulate this man, the last rider to take the yellow jersey on day one and keep it all the way to Paris. He did it 60 years ago, and no one's managed it since. The year was 1935, the rider was Romain Meis of Belgium, and this is the one time in the race he wasn't in yellow, the start. Meis won the first stage, though not so much under his own steam. It was out of French railways, nipping over a level crossing just before the barrier came down and stranded the rest of the field. That gave him a 3-minute lead, which he built on all the way to Paris, and no one has led the race from start to finish since.
Well, the news about Chris Boardman is not all bad at all. I'm sure Sally Ann will be pleased to hear that. In fact, the police are telling us here that Chris has not gone to hospital, but he is with his team manager and they are making a decision whether to go to hospital. But in fact, we believe that Chris crashed on a descent, slid completely off the course and did try to remount his bike, but had a leg problem and couldn't get going, and they stopped him. Now, Paul, I believe you have a further update on that.
Well, the information coming over the radio was that Jean-Claude Keely, the organisation of the Tour de France, was behind Chris Boardman at the time, and he said he was going the fastest of any of the riders that he'd followed so far today. He was flying along at 75 kilometres an hour. He came into a corner. He was going so fast, he didn't touch his brakes at all, and he lost it and went into the barriers. And that is the situation at the moment. They tried to get him back up onto his feet, but he just could not get going again, and that's a very sad day.
Well, with the rain that we've seen like there is today, let's have a look at how the result has turned out. And I'll tell you what, a lot of names we may not have heard of here in the top 5 places. Jackie Giron will be the winner of the stage. In second place, Thierry Laurent of Castorama team, Giron's teammate. Third, Francis Moreau, Chris Boardman's teammate, a former world champion, by the way. In fourth is Laurent Brochard, and in fifth is Arsenio Gonzalez of Miguel Indurain's Spanish Benesto team. Now, I have just been passed a note here from outside which tells me that Chris Boardman has a suspected broken collarbone, which means he is certainly out of the Tour de France, and he will certainly be now on his way to hospital. So, Chris Boardman out of the Tour de France, which is very, very sad indeed for all of us. We were expecting so much from him, but the Tour de France, of course, goes on. And tomorrow it will be 233 kilometres based here in Brittany. Let's hope the weather is a lot better, and it will go from Dinard along to Lannion. During our course of the 3 weeks, we'll bring you our competitions, and we'll keep you up to date with some very nice recipes on French cooking as well, on what has been an extremely strange night here in Saint-Brieuc. We'll leave you now with some sights and sounds of the Tour de France, the sort of sights and sound we hope you'll enjoy over the next 3 weeks. Until then, goodbye.